Hello, everyone. I'm Mark Weinstein, and let me welcome you to the first podcast in season number 11 of the Cedarville Stories Podcast. Wow, where has the time gone? I trust you've enjoyed many of our 247 podcasts that we've shared since the program began on September 11th, 2019. During this time, the Cedarville Stories Podcast has been downloaded more than 81,000 times by individuals in 75 countries. 85% of those listeners are in the United States, as we would expect, but 5% live in the Philippines, 3 in Canada, and 1 in the United Arab Emirates. Wherever you live and however you listen to the podcast, let me thank you for being a faithful listener. We appreciate you very much. And with the start of the new season, we're introducing a new feature to the program. You can now also watch the podcast if that's your preference. The audio version will not change, but the video podcast will be on our Cedarville Stories YouTube channel. Be sure to check out the video podcast if that's of interest to you. With that said, let me thank producer Chris Massa and his team for making the video podcast a reality. His commitment to excellence is noted, and I hope you will enjoy both formats of the podcast. Today on the podcast, I am talking with Erika Weise and Carrie Holt, a pair of Cedarville alumni who met each other as a church singles group after they graduated from Cedarville University. They both reside in suburban Columbus, Ohio, and they lovingly care for their family, including a pair of special needs children. I look forward to sharing their story today on the Cedarville Stories Podcast. So I was reading a story about the two of you that Sarah Mummert in Cedarville's Public Relations Department had written, and it was obvious that your families have a special bond that was formed through shared personal relationships with your children. So my question is, to start the podcast, is it a fair assessment to say that your relationship, the two of you, is more like sisters than maybe friends or just alumni? Carrie, what do you think about that?
I definitely think we have a lot of shared experiences. And the amazing thing is that we were friends before we had our kids with disabilities.
Okay.
And I would say I don't have any sisters. I only have one brother. Carrie has 2 sisters already, but I feel like Carrie has definitely been like a sister to me. It just, like she said, the shared experiences. And we were good friends. Even before we got married, we became friends. So
Right.
We had that bond even before we shared the experiences of our children.
So in that story that Sarah Mummert had written about you guys, she describes your relationship as an unbreakable bond. What does that look like to us who are listening or watching today's podcast? What's an unbreakable bond in your mind?
Well, I think it's just this affection and shared experiences with each other where we've just been able to support each other through a lot. And I think the really neat thing that I've noticed is, of course, when you are friends with another couple, you hope and pray that your children are going to be friends. And as they've gotten older, their friendships, it's not just that we're getting together as families, but our kids now that, some of them can drive, they're in college, that they're able to also get together and have that shared friendship. And so I think the unbreakable bond is just that that you have someone who has your back, and when things happen, you can call. And it's also understanding, I know I can call Erika and say, this happened to me today. Like, we're in the middle of a situation right now with our accessible van, and she really gets it. She really understands what I'm going through. It's great to have friends that can be super empathetic, but when somebody really has walked in your shoes, that I think is the unbreakable piece.
Well, I would piggyback off of what Carrie said. Being able to call somebody that truly understands and gets what we're going through. I mean, there have been times where my son will have a medical issue, and I just need to talk it out with somebody. I just need to, talk to somebody who understands, who gets it, who might be able to give me some advice. And Carrie's that person, because Carrie has been through a lot of the similar things that I have. So I feel like, yes, she's always just a phone call away. I can call her and ask her questions, or we can bounce things off of each other.
Yeah, and we're going to dig deeper into what your shared experiences are in a moment. But interesting to me, as I was preparing for this podcast, is I remember receiving an email from Benjamin. And Benjamin is Carrie's son. And he was encouraging me because he sat in a class where I was a guest lecturer. He sat in a class and said, I think you should do a story or a podcast about my mom and Erika Weise. And that's what we're doing. What it said to me was just how tight your families are and the love that's been developed over the years. I'm sure it doesn't surprise you, but how was that love developed so intensely between siblings of each family?
Well, I think we would have to go back to the very beginning of our story, really, to explain how that happened. I mean, when Carrie and I were at Cedarville, we didn't know each other. Okay. She actually knew my mom. My mom worked at the bookstore, and Carrie worked at the bookstore as well. So my mom got to know her. And I didn't meet Carrie until we were a part of the singles group at the church that we were attending.
Right.
And so it was before she got married and before I got married, but we got to know each other from that point. And then we actually went on a trip together as couples after we got married. And so we had this bond already growing, between ourselves. And so then we had children that were 16 hours apart. We were in the hospital together. So our kids just have grown up together, and they have developed that bond.
So Erika, you mentioned that your children were born 16 hours apart. Was that in the same hospital in Columbus?
Yes, right down the hall from each other.
Yeah. So it's crazy because I've been a fairly competitive person. And so I was due 3 weeks ahead of her. And then all of a sudden I'm 2 weeks overdue. And then she's calling me saying they're going to induce labor today. And I was scheduled to be induced the next morning.
Okay.
And so Evan was born at like 10:15 p.m. on a Thursday night. And I think, I won't know till I get to heaven, but I think my contractions started with my son the minute Evan came into the world.
Really?
And by 1:30 in the morning, I'm at the hospital. I'm in the waiting room with her husband on one side and my husband on the other, breathing through my contractions because I was waiting for a bed. The hospital was really busy. And then Connor comes into the world. He goes by his middle name. Sorry, he's Benjamin Connor.
Okay.
The next day. And then we've got pictures of our husbands holding our babies, of us holding each other's babies. We were right down the hall from each other. In fact, I asked the nurse to move me up to her floor so we could be near each other after we had our babies.
What was that like to share that experience so close together?
That was amazing. We couldn't have planned that. That was a total God thing. I mean, that was obviously, there was nothing we could have done. We were due 3 weeks apart. Which was close. We thought, oh, good, they're going to be really close, but we did not have any idea they would be 16 hours close.
Right. Now, earlier you mentioned about the singles group at church, and but the depth of your relationship truly came when Erika's oldest son, Evan, now a senior at Cedarville University, majoring in political science, was born with spinal muscular atrophy, a rare progressive neuromuscular genetic disease that really, surprisingly to me, affects only around 60 people a year. So when you first learned of the diagnosis, Erika, how did you and your husband, Carl, respond? It had to be a shock to your system.
So he had, at 3 months old, he decided he didn't want to eat anymore. He was really having trouble nursing. And so we ended up finding out that he was deciding between breathing and eating, and he was choosing breathing. So he's having a hard time breathing. We went into the hospital. He had surgery on his diaphragm. He was intubated. So he was on a breathing machine after that surgery, which he was never able to get off of. We were in the hospital for 3 months. We didn't know what was wrong with him. We actually didn't get a diagnosis until he was probably about 15 months old. And we had to send our blood work to Germany to have them diagnose him because he has a very rare form of spinal muscular atrophy.
Okay.
And there are 60 people worldwide that have it. So when we got that diagnosis, it was shocking. We had no idea what the prognosis would be. We didn't know what the future would look like.
So Carrie, so you have a newborn at the same time. So you're feeling the great joys of motherhood. Erika's feeling really the opposite. How were you able to share your joy in a way that still encourage Erika and her family?
Well, I remember the day that she called me, and I might get a little emotional about it, but I remember the day she called me and said, "Hey, we're taking Evan to the hospital," and then just I feel like I just tried to walk as best as I could through that process with her, setting up meals and setting up people to be with Evan at the hospital. Back then, you could kind of have around the clock people at the hospital. Now they don't don't allow you to have more than just a couple of listed people in the ICU with your child. But back then they allowed us to set up a bunch of people. So I remember going over their house and decorating their house for Christmas and doing silly things with a buck that they had on the wall that Carl had shot. Like we put a red nose on it or something. And just trying to be there the best we could, even though it wasn't our child. And I do remember, like, we have pictures of once Evan got out of the ICU and he's on the step down floor of holding our babies together, like in the same pajamas. And I think even the day or the day after Evan got home from the hospital, we were over there. I mean, I think the one way that I could support her was not to walk away from her. I think a lot of times friends, when you don't have a similar experience, and then all of a sudden, like, I might even feel guilty because here I have this healthy baby and Erika doesn't anymore, that I could walk away from her and not support her. And that's not what we did. The Lord, I didn't even ever cross my mind. I do remember, later on telling her, "Oh goodness, I can't believe some of the things I said to her." Once I went through a similar experience, just like I even said, I said some really stupid things to you, Erika, but I think you do the best you can. But again, I think the point is that a lot of times friends will walk away.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard when you go through trauma. It's hard when you go through grief.
That's the role of the body of Christ, to come alongside. And that's a great example for our listeners and viewers on the podcast to see when people are hurting and grieving, for us to come alongside. It's a great lesson for me. How long was Evan in the hospital?
He was in the hospital for exactly 3 months. Half of that was in the ICU, and then he was in just the step down floor, and he was put on the ventilator when he had the surgery, and they were never able to get him off the ventilator. So he is still on a ventilator 24/7. So we brought home a baby that was very different than we had gone into the hospital with. He was vent dependent. He was tube fed. He was hooked up to all of these monitors all the time. So we came home and we had to set up home care nursing to help us. So it was very different, a very different child that we brought home from the hospital than we went in with.
And for our listeners and viewers, Evan is doing well today. I see him on campus motoring around, talking to people. He's a magnet. People love to visit with him. He has a great personality. So he's doing well. But let's pivot the story a little bit, because the full story here is that about 3 years later, Carrie's third child, Toby, who's now 17 years old and homeschooled, was born with spina bifida. And like Evan, this confines Toby to a wheelchair in need of a ventilator. Carrie, when you first learned of Toby's serious health concerns, what went through your heart and your mind? And maybe Erika's, just Erika came to mind. I don't know, but what transpired in your heart and mind when this became a reality to you?
So I was 20 weeks pregnant with him when we went in for an ultrasound and found out about spina bifida. And what's rare about Toby is that he ended up needing a trach ventilator and a feeding tube. That that doesn't usually come with spina bifida. Spina bifida is a neural tube defect. It happens before a mom even knows she's pregnant. And I think, that day it was just devastating. My husband and I were just completely floored. We had 2 healthy boys at home who were 3 and 18 months old. And we thought, okay, we're just going in for another ultrasound. We've done this twice before, and here we go. And I think I remember calling Erika that day and just usually she's one of the first people I talk to, when it's related to something with Toby. And the irony of the situation, and I was just thinking about this before we got on the podcast, is that I had read about all these things called a Chiari crisis. Toby has a Chiari-2 malformation in his brain because he was also born with hydrocephalus. And it was a list of things, breathing problems, swallowing problems, aspiration problems. And this book literally said, could need a trach, might need a ventilator, this type of child needs a lot of family and community support. This is what the book said.
Okay.
And I'm reading this book while I'm pregnant and praying, I do not want to have this happen. Just praying really hard. I saw what Erika and Carl's life was like, and with nursing and all of these things. And I didn't necessarily want the same thing, but 2.5 weeks after Toby was born, he went into respiratory failure, and we ended up back in the hospital in almost the exact same situation. We were in the ICU for half the time. He was in for 64 days. He was fighting for his life. He almost died several times. He turned blue. And that was the moment where I looked at Erika and said, I said some really dumb things to you when when Evan was in the hospital. And then we bring home this medically fragile baby. And I remember the day before you're getting ready to take your baby home, and you have to do something called 24-hour care, where you and your spouse both basically have the support of the nursing, but you have to show that you can take care of your child before you can take them home from the hospital, or suction their trach and change their trach and do their feeding pump and run the machines and everything. you become a nurse is what happens. And I went home for a few hours, I think, after that, to kind of get our room ready. And guess who was there? Erika, because she knew this needs to go on this side of the bed because you're right-handed and you're going to suction this way. And you need to make sure you put the resuscitation bag on this side of the bed. And you should have this type of crib, because if you have to bag them because they're not breathing, you need to do this. And things that you feel like a parent should never have to know or learn, and you do. And there were times that I have questioned God. I have said, why, Lord, when I prayed so specifically that these things wouldn't happen, and you said no. Well, clearly, God said, yes, this is the path I have for you, but I've paved the way because Erika's here for you. I've paved the way because you read this book and you knew that this was a possibility. The expectation was there that this could happen. And I was even thinking about the reason why, at least I ended up at Northwest Bible, was because of Cedarville. Cedarville had ministry teams that were going there. And, God has been orchestrating all of this from many, many years. His plans are always so perfect and so good.
Right. So what's your recollection of those days, Erika, of coming alongside Carrie?
It was hard to believe that this was happening to her. I could not believe that Toby was as similar a situation as Evan. I couldn't believe he was coming home on a ventilator with a trach. And I kind of went into action, okay, this is what we need to do. We need to, like she said, we need to organize the room. We need to put things here. And just feeling like God was using all the things I had gone through to now help my friend. That felt like it gave purpose to what we had gone through, and that I could step, beside Carrie and just be like, I'm here for you. I know what you're going through, and let me help you. And I just, it really gave purpose to that, to our journey.
Yeah. God was definitely redeeming your situation for a greater good. At Toby's birth, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that Toby was born with a hole in his back and needed a lot of surgeries. How How many surgeries and what kind of surgeries did he need or has he needed since his birth?
So he had surgery the day he was born to close the open hole in his back. So spina bifida, the bones around the spinal cord don't close.
Okay.
And so it's called myelomeningocele. It means like a split or open spine. And it's similar to a spinal cord injury. Some kids can walk, but he cannot. And then they almost always have hydrocephalus, which is extra fluid in the brain. It requires surgery for a shunt. So he had those first 2 surgeries in the first 4 days of his life. And then we took him home when he was 8 days old. And I do remember thinking, I don't know how we're going to do this. There was quite a bit of medical care that we had to do even from the beginning. And it was like around the clock every 3 hours. And then you're trying to feed the baby every 3 hours. And sometimes those 2 things don't coincide. And we also had 2 toddlers at home. We had a 3-year-old and like an almost 2-year-old. And then 10 days later, he goes into respiratory failure. And then he had 3 more surgeries. And then in the first 15 years of his life, he had 60 surgeries.
Oh my goodness.
So he's had surgeries on his spine, surgeries to fix his shunt, surgeries on his abdomen, a complete bowel and bladder reconstruction, and just a lot of things that, we just have had to navigate, just being medically fragile. Like we'll take him to the hospital for some reason and they'll say, oh, well, we've never seen this before. This is just Toby. And it's been an up and down journey of just learning to walk by faith and learning to grieve. All of those times you're in the hospital, I think that's been I think Erika and I both have just understood that you're just always living in chronic grief in some part of that grieving cycle. And, and some days it just blindsides you. Like, when he turned 16, he couldn't get a driver's license. Like there's just things, I called Erika and was like, how do I deal with this? Because, she's a few years ahead of us and Evan's a few years older. And so it's just, you have to learn how to take things day by day and trust God and remember how faithful he's been in the past.
I'm curious to hear more about your support group. Tell me more about what this support group is and your focus, your purpose.
Well, so I think one day I just looked at Erika and said, there's a spina bifida support group in town, but I don't feel like we fit. Toby has all these rare things going on. We have nursing care. We have a feeding pump. We have this. And he's medically fragile. And I don't know what to do or where to go. These people aren't really going to get me. And I know you get me and your family understands. And Erika said to me, well, Evan has this rare form of SMA. It falls under the muscular dystrophy umbrella, but it's not typical for that either. So how about we just start a support group for moms of kids who have medically fragile kids? A lot of, and we had the group for probably, I don't know, about 10 or 12 years. We don't host it right now, but it was a monthly thing. We would get together for dinner. Most of our moms had kids with nursing care and some form of medical fragility that they could relate. And honestly, God just kind of brought us people. We met one mom at the zoo. Go ahead, Erika.
I was going to say it grew organically. Just
it did.
When we were out and about and we would see another mom with a child with similar needs, we just go up and start talking to them and invite them to join us. And so that, like she said, at the zoo, we saw a mom that had a little baby with a trach that, both our boys have trachs. And so we just went up and started chatting with her. And so the group just grew just by people knowing people and bringing them to our group.
I think one thing is like, we weren't afraid to get our families together and go do things together in public. Like, I'm not sure where that fearlessness came in. It was probably from the Lord, but a lot of times families like ours will just kind of stay home and not take their kids out. And we didn't do that. And I think it allowed for us to be able to, for people to see us. And like Erika said, the group to grow organically because we weren't afraid to go up to people, to be out in public, to be seen together. And then for people to see, hey, you can take your medically fragile baby out in public and you can do these things together.
And on that same note, I was thinking, Carrie and I, our families have really tried our best to make life as normal as possible, especially for our other kids. And so we have done, amazing things that probably other families would be afraid to do, but we're we're just want to get out there. We want to live as normal a life as possible. And in that, we're able to meet other people and be able to have that relationship with them.
Yeah, I think it does take courage to go out in public, especially when you have a child who has an issue that society may not view as lovely. But, that's really a picture in my mind of the church, because I think so many times we as churchgoers, we come to Sunday with our Sunday best, our great faces, but what are we really hiding and what are we really dealing with? We're all dealing with similar things, just not what you guys were dealing with, but they're just as important to take focus of and heal. So I commend you for your courage and your leadership. As we begin to wrap up today's program, I'm interested in hearing from both of you, what life lessons have you learned from going through caring for one another and dealing with your own personal difficulties? Erika.
Well, I think first of all, for dealing with our own difficulties has really been trust in the Lord with all your heart. I mean, lean not on your own understanding. That verse has been very impactful to me, because our own understanding of the condition that Evan has is that we did not think he would live as productive of a life as he has. We didn't ever think he would talk. We would, definitely not going to Cedarville and, majoring in political science and doing so well in academics and doing all this that he has done. So our own understanding when we first got that diagnosis was, all the medical journals say he's not going to live past 2 and he's not going to live a very productive life. He's never going to be able to speak. And so trusting in God that his plan, he knows, and just with Carrie's family too, is just seeing that God had a purpose for what we went through in order to come alongside them and to be friends with them. That just made it it gave purpose, like I said, to our journey.
So I think probably one of the greatest things that I've learned is it kind of echoes back to what we used to sing when Dr. Dixon was president at Cedarville, that Christ is all you need. And I think the thing that I've learned is, you mentioned about going to church and, sometimes we're not willing to take the mask off. And I think sometimes we do the same thing with God. We feel like we have to clean ourselves up before we come into his presence. And I think the thing that I've learned is that I can lament this to the Lord. And the Psalms are full of lament. I believe Christ lamented in the garden before the night at the cross. And we have to be honest with God about how we feel, because this is not the plan. I think Erika and I could both say, this is not the plan of what we wanted for motherhood, marriage. When we were students at Cedarville, you have all these dreams of what you want your life to look like.
Right.
And neither of those dreams came true for us. Now I think God has given us better plans, better dreams. God has used this in amazing ways in both of our lives and given us ministry. I remember Erika, I actually found a letter she wrote to me, I think for my birthday, right before Toby went back in the hospital, but kind of in between our stays. And she said, you have a ministry because you've gone through certain things. And that is certainly true. But the thing of it is you have to allow God to use it as ministry and being able to reach out to other people and not grow bitter. And I think the way you don't grow bitter is you grieve and lament and you turn to the Lord and say, okay, Lord, this is not what I wanted, but I know you're faithful. And how can you use my testimony for your glory?
And it's refreshing to see that you are using these stories, these situations for his glory. And it's obvious to me as an outsider watching your story. Let me go back to Erika. So Evan's a rising senior. He'll graduate at the end of this next school year. What do you think his career aspirations are? Is he going to be the next senator?
Well, he would say he wants to be the next president.
There you go.
He'll probably take a 5th year senior. He'll probably go for 5 years.
Okay.
We have been taking it slowly. He doesn't take as many credit hours per semester just for what he can do. But I don't know. I do not know what God has in store for him. I'm excited to see what God will do with him. He has a story. He has his own testimony, his own story of what he's been through, and he's not afraid to share. He's not afraid to talk about it. So I really don't know what God will do with him, but I know it will be amazing to watch.
Let's fast forward down the road. So Evan's going to graduate in a year or two, probably closer to 2. Connor will graduate this coming year at Cedarville. Can you envision what that day will be like for your families when you see your sons receive their diplomas from our president?
I just think it's going to be surreal. It's fun because Connor will text me and he'll say, "Hey, Evan's coming over tonight." And then, Erika and Carl don't live too far from Cedarville, and Connor's friend group along with Evan will go over there. And I think it's such a blessing to know that their friendship is not out of pity or obligation, but it's a true friendship for one another. Yeah. And to have them both at Cedarville, and then to have our second sons both at Cedarville. It's just I don't know. It's just, you can't describe the joy I think that we have.
Yeah. And I'll say, Connor has been such a great friend for Evan. He has really, like she said, it's not a pity. They're just really good friends. And so it's such a blessing for him to have a good friend like that. And it will be amazing to see them graduate from Cedarville. It'll be really cool to see him graduate the same year, but still very memorable to see Evan roll across the stage and shake the president's hand and pick up that diploma, which he's well deserved. So my last question as we end the podcast is, from a parent's perspective, how would you say Cedarville has prepared your children to be effective in their careers, but more importantly, ambassadors for Jesus? Cedarville has been so amazing for Evan in particular, just because they have come alongside him and worked with his needs. He has a lot of physical needs still, even though he's on campus. He types with his pinky knuckle. And so in order to get things typed up for tests or for whatever, he takes a lot of time. But the professors have been so accommodating and so kind to him, and he just feels very loved and very accepted on campus. And so I just applaud Cedarville for what they have done for him and for his special needs. And I think the education obviously is amazing too, and he's going to be well prepared for what he does, what God chooses to do through him.
And before Carrie answers, so when it was time for Evan to come to Cedarville for college his freshman year, do you have any apprehension of sending him?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I knew Cedarville. I mean, I had had experience, obviously, graduating from Cedarville, so I knew the people were going to be amazing. I just worried about, well, for one thing, he needs a nurse to come with him every day.
Right.
And stay with him. So for a while, we didn't have a nurse. So my husband and I would take turns going to Cedarville with him and staying with him all day. And but it was just neat to see his interactions with the students. The students are so kind and opening doors for him. And but I did have apprehensions because I just didn't know what college would look like for him. But it's been a good experience.
Well, I remember very clearly in chapel when I was a student, Dr. Dixon saying, "Don't assume because you're at a Christian college that you're going to have Christian friends. You need to pray for Christian friends." And I see that evidenced in how God has orchestrated our friendship with Carl and Erika. Yep. And I also see it in our son and him being there. I think just Cedarville's commitment to truth, to biblical authority, and also to, kids being able to have discussions. And I love just a couple months ago, Connor brought home 13 of his closest friends for a night at the house. But it's such a blessing to be able to serve them and see that if it weren't for Cedarville, the community that our kids have around them would not be there. And I know it's going to be jackets for life because it's happened in our own lives. And that is huge. It's amazing.
It is Cedarville. I agree with Cedarville, but the bottom line, it's Jesus and his work through Cedarville that's making a difference. It's not the institution. It's the relationships. Right. So gentle there, but
Yes,
You're
right.
It is so exciting. I mean, I've worked at 6 different universities, and if anyone listening to this program wants to attend a Christian university that's truly focused on the Word of God, Cedarville is the place that you really need to look at and see if we have a major for you. And you can go to cedarville.edu and check us out, and maybe this is the right place for you, like it is for Erika and Carrie's children. So, guys, I want to thank you for being vulnerable and open and sharing your story. You're delightful, and I hope to see you on campus sometime. And thanks for joining me this week on the Cedarville Stories Podcast. It's great to be with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Cedarville Stories Podcast, brought to you by Cedarville University. You are encouraged to subscribe, share, like, and review this podcast on your favorite podcast provider. And be sure to come back next week when we have another Cedarville story for God's glory.